The atmosphere inside Terminal B was suddenly brittle with tension, the kind of silence that doesn't just fall, but lands. Over 200 travelers had frozen mid-movement, their eyes all drawn to the slim phone in Dr. Malcolm Grant's steady hand. A simple device had become something extraordinary, an amplifier of truth in a place where authority had just faltered. The gate agent, once brimming with procedural certainty, now stood pale and visibly shaken. Tiny beads of sweat sparkled along her hairline as she clutched the edge of the counter for support. Behind her, the boarding monitor for Flight 2816 to Silver Ridge blinked on, blissfully oblivious to the escalating human drama beneath it. "I believe," Malcolm said, his voice quiet but commanding enough to fill the terminal, "you'll find everything is in proper order." But 8 hours earlier, the biggest issue Malcolm had faced was locating his lucky tie. He stood in the master bedroom of their Monroe Hills home, rifling through drawers in a mild panic. "It has to be here somewhere," he murmured to himself. Leaning lazily in the doorway, Jaden, his 17-year-old son, scrolled through his phone with casual disinterest. "Dad, we've got like 20 minutes before we need to hit the road if we're going to make it through security," Jaden said without looking up. "Mom's already in the car, answering emails like a machine." Malcolm pulled out tie after tie, neatly folded silks, paisleys, even a holiday-themed one with snowflakes, until at last he found it, a blue tie with tiny diamond patterns nestled deep behind the sock organizer. "Tradition," he said aloud, grinning. 17 years of lectures and keynotes, and not once have I bombed wearing this." Jaden rolled his eyes but smiled back. "I think it's your brain keeping your tenure, not your tie, Professor. At 52, Dr. Malcolm Grant was regarded as one of the leading neurologists in the country, known for his innovative research into degenerative cognitive diseases. His work on early-stage Alzheimer's had already shifted conversations in the field. But today was a milestone, the unveiling of a new data set that could change diagnostic timelines globally. This wasn't just another academic presentation. It was 5 years of relentless research, late nights, and a team that believed in the mission. And it was the rare opportunity for a full family trip, something they hadn't managed in years. His wife, Celeste, a powerhouse attorney known for her sharp mind and even sharper cross-examinations, had miraculously carved out time in her demanding schedule. Meanwhile, Jaden, analytical like his father, fierce like his mother, would be visiting Bayshore University while in Silver Ridge. The occasion deserved first-class tickets. Malcolm had booked them months in advance, wanting to make every detail perfect. Found it. Malcolm held the tie up like a victory banner. "Let's roll," Jaden replied, already heading downstairs. Their home stood on a leafy street in an affluent corner of Monroe Hills, a Tudor-style house framed by manicured gardens that Celeste somehow found time to maintain despite her 70-hour work weeks. As Malcolm locked the front door, he paused for a moment, taking in the place that symbolized everything he and Celeste had built, starting with nothing but scholarships, grit, and a mountain of student debt. In the sleek black sedan waiting in the driveway, Celeste was tapping rapidly on her tablet, the glow from the screen reflecting in her glasses. "The tie emergency has been handled, I see," she said dryly, glancing up with an arched brow. Malcolm slid into the passenger seat. "Some things are sacred, Counselor G." She gave him a sidelong smirk, but her free hand reached over to give his a squeeze. "The Stevenson brief is dragging," she murmured. "I need at least 10 more minutes on it before takeoff. Then I can fully switch off." "Take 20, Malcolm replied. "I packed your noise-canceling headphones. You'll forget the world exists." The drive to Cedarwood International Airport was smooth, until it wasn't. As they neared the terminal, a familiar tangle of cars and hurried travelers slowed them down. Jaden, earbuds in, looked up from the back seat. "Dad, did you print the boarding passes? The airline app keeps freezing on my phone. Right here." Malcolm tapped the breast pocket of his blazer, where 3 crisp first-class boarding passes rested next to his passport. "Technology's great, until it fails." Celeste smirked. Says the man who codes neurological mapping tools for fun. They breezed through check-in, Malcolm tipping the porter generously. Security took its usual toll, slow lines, bins of shoes, awkward pat-downs, but they made it through without much delay. Inside the terminal, the familiar scent of coffee and travel buzzed around them. Overpriced souvenirs filled store windows, and generic eateries promised culinary experiences they couldn't quite deliver. "We've got an hour," Celeste noted, checking her watch. "I need coffee." "Good coffee, or I'll cross-examine the flight attendants." Malcolm nodded. "Jaden and I will scout the gate." As Celeste disappeared into a cafe that boasted artisanal roast on its chalkboard menu, father and son made their way toward Gate D12. The lounge was already filling with travelers, the usual suspects. Business people in pressed suits, parents wrangling toddlers, students traveling solo with music as their only companion. "I'm grabbing a magazine," Jaden said, nodding toward the newsstand. "Smart move," Malcolm said, dropping into an empty seat near the boarding podium. He pulled out his phone, opening the slide deck for his keynote. Not that he needed the review. He'd rehearsed these words in mirrors, in meeting rooms, and in his head while brushing his teeth. 15 minutes later, Celeste returned carrying 3 coffees in a cardboard tray, her expression less than impressed. $15 for 3 cups, she announced, handing them out. "This is legal robbery." Malcolm accepted his cup gratefully. The price of civilization in transit. Celeste sank into the seat beside him, her shoulder brushing his. "Presentation good?" "Solid." Dr. Kwan emailed. "They're already setting up an overflow room, standing room only." A flicker of pride passed over Celeste's features. "As it should be. You've earned this." Their moment was cut short by a familiar chime overhead. A voice rang out over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are now beginning the boarding process for Flight 2816 to Silver Ridge. We will start with our premier travelers and first-class guests." Jaden reappeared just in time, a science magazine tucked under his arm. "Perfect," Malcolm said, standing. "They'll be calling us any second now." He didn't know it yet, but what waited at the gate was a moment that would stretch far beyond this flight, something that would travel with them far past Silver Ridge. The gate agent, mid-40s, tightly curled blonde hair, and a smile that looked more painted than real, stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice overly chipper, "we are now ready to begin boarding Sky Air Flight 2816 to Silver Ridge. We welcome our Platinum Elite members and all first-class passengers to board at this time." Malcolm gave a small nod to Celeste and Jaden, and the Grant family moved forward as a unit, joining the modest cluster of passengers lined up in the first-class boarding lane. Most were older men in tailored blazers, a few women dressed in understated luxury, and some sprightly retirees treating themselves to extra legroom and early boarding. The Grants were the only black family in the line. When they reached the front, Malcolm handed over the 3 neatly printed boarding passes to the agent. Her name tag read, Tricia Langston. She took one look at the documents, then at the family. Her smile wavered. Barely, but enough. "Just one moment, please," she said, her tone cooling noticeably as her eyes scanned the passes more slowly this time. Malcolm felt a faint but familiar tightening in his chest. It was a feeling he'd known too many times, in too many cities, in too many so-called professional settings. Beside him, Celeste straightened, just slightly, but he felt the shift in her posture. The lawyer in her was now alert. Jaden, still lost in his phone, remained oblivious to the tension building in the air. "Is there a problem?" Malcolm asked calmly, deliberately neutral. Tricia reattached her synthetic smile. "I just need to verify a few things," she said. "These are first-class tickets for the Grant family?" The way she said it carried a note of doubt so practiced it was nearly undetectable. "Unless you'd been on the receiving end of it 100 times. "That's correct," Celeste interjected smoothly. 3 first-class tickets purchased in full and confirmed nearly 2 months ago. Trisha's fingers clacked across her keyboard, each keystroke exaggerated and drawn out. Behind the Grants, a few of the first-class passengers fidgeted with impatience. "I'm seeing some irregularities here," Trisha murmured after a moment, lowering her voice as if to shield them from imagined embarrassment. "There appears to have been a system glitch. The seating chart shows your names assigned to the main cabin. Row 32, seats A, B, and C." Malcolm frowned. "That can't be correct. I booked our seats directly on your airline's website and received both the itinerary and confirmation emails. I can pull them up right now." He reached for his phone, but Trisha lifted a manicured hand. "Sir, I understand your confusion. However, our system reflects you in economy. Sometimes the printed boarding passes reflect seat preferences, not actual confirmed seating." The implication hung heavy in the air, that perhaps they'd only hoped to sit in first class, that perhaps this was a mistake, or an assumption. Behind them, a distinguished-looking man with silver hair and a crisp charcoal blazer cleared his throat with practiced annoyance. "There's no confusion," Celeste said, her voice suddenly clipped with courtroom precision. "My husband booked first-class seats, and our boarding passes reflect that. Kindly escalate this, or honor the tickets as issued." Jaden looked up then, sensing the shift. He locked eyes with his mother, then glanced at the gate agent. The dawning realization stiffened his posture. He'd seen this scenario before, though he hadn't lived it quite like this. Trisha's smile stiffened, her eyes narrowing. "Ma'am, I'm simply relaying what my screen tells me. If you'd like, we can step aside and discuss this further, but I'm afraid you'll need to wait for economy boarding." A wave of heat rose in Malcolm's chest, but decades of experience had taught him the risk of responding emotionally in public, especially when wearing skin like his. He took a breath, measured and slow, and replied with deliberate calm. "Ms. Langston, I understand you're reviewing what your screen tells you, but there's clearly an error. These boarding passes were issued by your airline. I also have the payment confirmation showing we paid full fare for first class." As Malcolm spoke, he became increasingly aware of the attention gathering around them. Conversations had slowed. Heads had turned. Some passengers watched with polite discomfort. Others were openly curious. Trisha's expression didn't waver, but her voice grew more formal. Sometimes, printed boarding passes reflect requested seating rather than confirmed. Our digital system is the final authority, and at this time, it shows your family and economy. Please, if you'll just step aside." "I'm not stepping aside," Celeste cut in, her voice like glass under pressure, controlled but sharp. "What, specifically, is irregular about our reservation? Because from where I stand, the only irregularity I see is your resistance to honoring our clearly issued first-class boarding passes." Trisha blinked. It was subtle, but there it was, the crack in the polished performance. Celeste's tone, her choice of words, it wasn't just someone standing up for themselves. It was someone who knew exactly how systems worked and how to hold them accountable. Trisha's eyes darted nervously toward a nearby supervisor, an older man in a navy blazer helping another guest several feet away. "Mom," Jaden muttered, his voice low and uncertain. At 17, he was caught in that liminal space, part of him ready to stand tall for his family, another part wishing to disappear into the floor. Celeste touched her son's arm lightly but didn't take her eyes off Trisha. "We're not stepping aside. We're not accepting economy boarding. We paid for first class, we were issued first-class passes, and we intend to sit in the seats we paid for." Behind them, the silver-haired man who had cleared his throat spoke again, his voice full of entitlement. "Excuse me, but some of us would like to board. Could you settle this after we're seated?" Malcolm turned to him, measured and dignified. "Sir, we also have confirmed seats in first class. We're simply asking the airline to honor that." The man's lips thinned, but he said nothing more. At last, the supervisor approached. His name tag read Don Riley. He offered a smile that looked polished by years of complaints. "Is there a problem here, Trisha?" he asked. "These passengers have boarding passes for first class, but the system shows them in coach," she explained, a defensive edge creeping into her tone. "I've told them there may have been a computer error. I was just about to offer comfort seating as a courtesy." Riley turned to the Grants, his demeanor professional but remote. "May I see your boarding passes?" Malcolm handed them over without a word. Riley took a long moment studying them, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to the terminal, tapping at keys with practiced precision. "I see the issue," he finally said, his voice carefully neutral. "There appears to be a mismatch between the seating chart and what's printed on your boarding passes." He glanced up at them. "Unfortunately, our first-class cabin is fully booked at this time." "Unfortunately," Don Riley said, carefully modulating his tone, "our first-class cabin is currently at full capacity. We can, however, offer your family seats in our Comfort Select section as a courtesy." Celeste's eyebrow arched, dangerously precise. "A courtesy?" Her voice was soft, yet every syllable landed with legal clarity. "We paid full fare for first class. This isn't about favors. It's about upholding a contractual agreement." Around them, the terminal had grown noticeably quieter. Travelers paused mid-conversation. A few shuffled awkwardly, recognizing the moment for what it was but unsure whether to speak, move on, or simply watch. Malcolm scanned the faces, some sympathetic, others blank. All still. "Perhaps," he offered calmly, "you could show us exactly where this so-called discrepancy lies. I have the original confirmation email with our assigned first-class seats, the receipt reflecting full payment, and, as you've already seen, the boarding passes your airline issued, all in first class." Don's polite facade remained, but his jaw flexed. "Sir, occasionally our booking system allows overselling in premium classes. While your intention may have been to purchase first class, the system may have reassigned you to coach automatically. It's rare, but it happens. That's not how commercial airline systems work," Jaden interjected suddenly. His voice cracked slightly from nerves, but his words were razor-sharp. "Airline inventory systems don't arbitrarily reassign confirmed reservations. If a ticket was booked in first class and confirmed, then that inventory was secured and removed from public availability." Malcolm turned, stunned but proud. His son had clearly been paying attention at the dinner table, especially last fall when Celeste had been consulting on a major airline merger. Don blinked, clearly caught off guard by the teen's articulate challenge. "Young man," he began, grasping at authority, "I've worked in airline operations for over 15 years, and I can assure you—" "I'd like to speak to the gate manager," Celeste cut in coolly, not raising her voice but stopping him mid-sentence. "Not a supervisor. The manager responsible for this gate." A tense pause. Don's jaw tightened slightly. "Ma'am," he said, barely concealing his frustration, "I'm the senior agent on duty. I've explained the situation and provided a reasonable alternative. If you don't wish to accept it, I'll need you to step aside so we may complete boarding." Malcolm saw Jaden stiffen beside him, his hands curled into nervous fists. Celeste's eyes had narrowed, her lips pressing into the calm, deadly line that opposing counsel feared in courtrooms. And just before either could speak again, a new voice broke through the tension. Unexpected, gentle, but firm. "Excuse me," said an elderly woman seated nearby, her voice a soft drawl with undertones of steel. She rose slowly, relying on a carved wooden cane, but every movement was deliberate, controlled, commanding. "I couldn't help overhearing your situation," she continued, approaching the desk, "and I believe I may have a sense of what's going on here." The entire terminal seemed to freeze again. The woman looked to be in her mid-70s, dressed immaculately in a cream-colored wool coat over a vintage navy skirt suit. Her pearl necklace gleamed beneath the fluorescent lights. Hair silver and styled in a classic bob, her sharp eyes scanned Don and Tricia with the calm precision of someone used to being listened to. "Mrs. Whitmore," Don said, his voice suddenly more respectful. "How can I assist you today?" She stepped forward with quiet authority. "Dawn, is it? I've been flying with this airline since before you were old enough to hold a job. My late husband and I ran our own logistics firm and we traveled frequently. And let me tell you, I've seen a lot of these so-called misunderstandings at gates." Her voice was soft, but her words sliced through the air with practiced ease. "And I must say," she continued, now looking directly at Tricia, "this one looks mighty familiar. A well-dressed black family presents valid first-class boarding passes, only to be told there's a mysterious system error that places them in the back of the plane." A flush crept up Dawn's neck. "Mrs. Whitmore, I assure you, this is purely a system-related issue." "Is it?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. Her tone was polite but unmistakably skeptical, because from where I'm standing, it looks a lot like what I used to see in the 1960s, just wrapped in cleaner language and a newer uniform. The terminal, which had been humming with quiet chatter moments before, had fallen silent again. Passengers were no longer pretending not to listen. Many were watching openly now. Tricia's face had paled considerably. Dawn's jaw was clenched so tightly his temple pulsed. "I appreciate your concern, ma'am," he said stiffly, "but I can assure you that race has absolutely nothing to do with this seating matter." Eleanor Whitmore smiled, warm but unflinching. "Then you won't mind checking the manifest again, will you? Because in my experience, these errors have a peculiar way of only affecting passengers who look like them." Malcolm glanced at Celeste, who met his eyes for a beat. Neither of them had expected backup from a woman who looked like she'd come from a garden club brunch. And yet, here she was, saying what needed to be said with a kind of grace and resolve that made it impossible to ignore. Jaden was staring at her now with something like awe. With visible reluctance, Don turned back to his terminal and began typing. His fingers struck the keys harder than necessary. Several moments passed. Then his shoulders slumped just slightly. "It seems," he said carefully, "there was some confusion in the reservation system. The Grant family does, in fact, have confirmed first-class seating." Celeste's face remained stoic, but Malcolm could see the fire of vindication in her eyes. "Well," she said, voice even, "what a surprise." "I'm so glad we've cleared up this little hiccup," Eleanor said brightly, her smile returning as if the whole thing had been a brief detour on the way to brunch. "These good folks should board now, don't you think? We wouldn't want to delay the flight." Dawn nodded stiffly, handing the boarding passes back to Malcolm. "Our apologies for the inconvenience. You're cleared to board." The Grant family stepped forward toward the jet bridge, and to their surprise, Mrs. Whitmore walked with them, her cane tapping gently against the tiled floor. "Eleanor Whitmore," she said quietly to Malcolm, "and may I just say, the grace and patience you showed back there? Remarkable. I've seen these so-called computer errors happen far too often, especially when the passengers don't look like the airline's expectations for first class." "Malcolm Grant," he replied, extending a hand, which she took firmly. "This is my wife, Celeste, and our son, Jaden. Thank you for stepping in, though I wish it hadn't been necessary." Eleanor gave a small wave. "At my age, speaking up is the least I can do. I've stayed silent too many times in the past. No more." She turned to Jaden. "Your parents handled that with dignity, young man. Take note. It's a masterclass in standing your ground without losing your grace." Jaden nodded, his expression serious. "They've had a lot of practice," he said quietly. The four of them moved down the jet bridge together, Celeste engaging Eleanor in soft conversation about her travels. Malcolm, walking a step behind, found himself deep in thought. The situation wasn't new to him, but having a stranger stand up and name it for what it was? That had power. As they reached the aircraft door, a flight attendant greeted them with a practiced smile. "Welcome aboard, folks. First class is to your right." Malcolm felt the weight on his shoulders begin to lift as he stepped into the cabin. For a few hours at least, their seats could not be questioned. Once they were settled into their seats, Malcolm stood to assist Eleanor Whitmore with her small carry-on, gently placing it in the overhead compartment before lowering himself beside Celeste. Across the aisle, Jaden sat beside Eleanor, the two chatting easily as the other first-class passengers trickled in. As Malcolm buckled his belt, he caught the eye of the same silver-haired man from the gate, the one who had impatiently pushed for them to move aside. The man's expression was unreadable as he passed, eventually slipping into a seat a few rows behind them. The first-class cabin filled quickly with a soft murmur of voices and the quiet clink of glassware from the pre-departure drink service. It was oddly soothing after the confrontation at the gate. "I still have all the receipts and emails," Celeste murmured under her breath, her voice low enough for only her husband to hear. "This isn't over." Malcolm reached over and gently squeezed her hand. "I know," he replied, "but let's get through the conference first. The keynote has to be the priority." Celeste nodded. "Of course. But after that, I'm writing a formal complaint. What happened wasn't just rude, it was systemic, and they nearly got away with it." Across the aisle, Eleanor leaned in slightly, her eyes bright with something that resembled mischief. "First time in first class, darlings?" Celeste smiled, recognizing both the deliberate volume of the question and its intention. A subtle challenge to any fellow passengers still harboring silent judgments. "Not at all," she replied smoothly. "Malcolm travels first class regularly for medical conferences. He's presenting a keynote this weekend in Bay Ridge on recent findings in neurodegenerative disorders." "How fascinating," Eleanor said, her voice projecting just enough. "My late husband was a neurosurgeon. I've always thought the brain was the most elegant mystery in all of science. What's your focus, Dr. Grant?" Malcolm, sensing her motive, offered a small smile and leaned into the conversation. "My specialty is early-onset Alzheimer's. The presentation will cover a potential breakthrough in detection and treatment. It's the culmination of a 5-year study." As they spoke, Malcolm noticed the subtle shift around the cabin. A few fellow passengers straightened in their seats. Others gave sideways glances that now carried a different tone. Less skepticism, more recalibration. The same people who may have questioned their presence were now adjusting silently, understanding they weren't just passengers, they were professionals, keynotes, equals. It was a dance Malcolm knew too well. The assumption, the revelation, the unspoken recalibration. A flight attendant appeared beside their row with a tray of beverages. "Champagne before takeoff?" she asked. "Yes, please," Celeste replied with a gracious nod, accepting the glass with practiced ease. Once the attendant moved on, Eleanor leaned closer again, this time lowering her voice. "You know," she said in a conspiratorial whisper, "I've learned that living well is indeed the best revenge, but a paper trail and a sharply worded letter to a company executive, that can be awfully satisfying, too." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. "I've been keeping track of, let's call them glitches on this airline for the past 3 years. Would you believe passengers of color seem to experience these errors about 8 times more often than white passengers? Especially in premium cabins." Jaden's eyes widened. "You've been collecting data." Eleanor's expression turned serene. "Young man, I taught statistics at Cumberland University for 40 years before I retired. Data is my love language." Malcolm let out a surprised laugh, genuine and sudden. This impeccably dressed woman with pearls and a designer coat was far more than she appeared. "Appearances can be deceiving, can't they?" Eleanor said, reading his expression with the same sharp intuition she had used at the gate. "People see an older Southern woman and assume I'm harmless and uninformed, just as they see a black family in first class and draw equally flawed conclusions. Both are wrong." The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing their imminent departure. The flight attendants began their final walkthrough, ensuring seats were upright and belts fastened. As the engines roared to life and the plane began its taxi down the runway, Malcolm felt a mix of anticipation and unease. He'd flown countless times, but the weight of the previous hour clung stubbornly to him. Celeste had already donned her noise-canceling headphones and turned to her tablet, diving into legal briefs with focused ease. Across the aisle, Jaden and Eleanor were deep in conversation, the teen gesturing animatedly as he spoke. Malcolm allowed himself a moment to exhale. The gate scene was behind them, for now. They had won that battle, but he knew it was just one of many. For every Eleanor Whitmore who spoke up, there were a dozen situations where no one did, where prejudice hid behind policy, where errors went unchallenged, where black travelers were reminded, quietly, firmly, of where they were expected to be. The plane ascended smoothly into the clear blue sky, leaving Eastbridge International Airport behind. They had 5 hours in the air. Malcolm opened his laptop and focused on his slides, determined not to let discrimination derail the work that could change lives. 2 hours into the flight, after the meal trays had been cleared and most passengers had retreated into their own worlds, Malcolm found himself engaged once again in conversation with Eleanor. Jaden, beside her, had fallen asleep, his long frame somehow folded comfortably into the plush seat, earbuds still in, his chest rising and falling in the even rhythm of rest. "Your son tells me you're presenting on neuroplasticity," Eleanor said, sipping her tea. "He's very proud of you, you know. His eyes lit up when he talked about your research." Malcolm glanced at his son, a soft pride spreading across his chest. "That's good to hear. Teenagers don't always say things like that directly." "Indeed," Eleanor chuckled. "My grandson is Jaden's age. Getting a full sentence out of him is like catching a comet." She paused for a moment, her expression shifting to something more serious. "May I ask you something personal, Malcolm?" "Of course," he said, genuinely curious. Eleanor studied him for a moment. "How do you balance it all? The constant readiness, the need to prepare for these incidents, like what happened back at the gate, while also carrying the weight of the work you do. It seems an unfair burden." Malcolm wasn't expecting the question. Most white colleagues, when they broached the topic at all, tiptoed around it, cloaking their curiosity in vague euphemisms. "It's complicated," he said after a thoughtful pause. "Some days, it feels like background noise. Always there, but I can tune it out. Other days, it's the whole song. Right up front, the key, I've learned, is not to let either version define me completely." Eleanor nodded slowly. "It sounds exhausting." "It can be, but you get used to walking with armor on, even when you wish you didn't have to." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "I imagine that kind of mental balancing act takes immense effort." "It does," Malcolm replied. "But what's harder is accepting that those mental compartments, work, race, family, stress, they always end up leaking into each other. I'll be trying to stay focused on my presentation tomorrow, but what happened at the gate will still color everything, no matter how much I try to push it out." He paused, then added, "Just like my excitement about the research helped me stay calm back there. There's always this calculation, whether speaking up is worth the cost, whether this is the right moment to spend another confrontation token." Eleanor gave a quiet, knowing hum. "My husband's closest friend was a brilliant black neurosurgeon, Dr. Lionel Hayes. We used to have dinner with him and his wife nearly every month for decades. I still remember him saying, 'I only get so many confrontation tokens in a day, and I have to save mine for the operating room, where it could save a life.'" Malcolm smiled, a flash of appreciation lighting his face. "That's exactly it. I love that term. Confrontation tokens. And you don't just spend your own. Every time we speak up, we're spending tokens for the whole family." Across the seat, Celeste stirred, pulling off her noise-canceling headphones. "Are we talking about the token economy of racism?" she asked dryly, though her eyes were serious. "I've been keeping a mental spreadsheet since I was 12. Eleanor let out a soft chuckle. "I was just admiring how your family handled the gate situation. It was a master class. Firm, composed, grounded." Years of practice, Celeste replied, echoing Jaden's earlier words. Though I admit, I'm not always as reserved. In the courtroom, I have protections airports don't offer. The conversation shifted easily from there, first to Celeste's legal work, then to Eleanor's long career as a professor. Despite their differences in background, they found surprising common ground in navigating predominantly white institutions, each from a different angle. Malcolm found himself struck by Eleanor's sincere curiosity. She didn't just ask questions to be polite. She genuinely listened. More importantly, she didn't expect them to teach her everything, or to speak on behalf of every person of color. It was a refreshing kind of exchange. Eventually, as the lights dimmed for passengers to rest, Malcolm excused himself to stretch his legs. On his way to the lavatory, he passed the same silver-haired man who had been behind them during the boarding conflict. The man looked up, gave a stiff nod, and then, somewhat unexpectedly, said quietly, "That was badly handled." At the gate. It shouldn't have happened. Malcolm slowed, taken aback by the candor. "No," he replied calmly. "It shouldn't have." The man hesitated, as if weighing whether to say more, but then he gave another short nod and returned his gaze to the aisle. Not quite an apology, Malcolm thought. Not exactly allyship either, but maybe a sliver of acknowledgement. A crack in the smooth wall of polite indifference that usually covered such moments. When Malcolm returned to his seat, Nina, a flight attendant with a sleek bun and kind eyes, was speaking with Celeste. "If you can provide that information," Celeste was saying in her measured, professional tone, "we'd appreciate it." Nina nodded, her expression professional but sympathetic. "Of course, Mrs. Grant. I'll make sure the incident is documented in my report. On behalf of the airline, I apologize for what you experienced at the gate." As Nina moved down the aisle, Malcolm settled beside his wife, raising an eyebrow. "The purser's filing a formal report," Celeste explained. "Apparently, what happened reached the flight crew." "That's something," Malcolm said, exhaling slowly, "though I'm still not sure what outcome we're aiming for here. A simple apology? Compensation?" Celeste's face hardened slightly. "Accountability. Colleen and Travis need to understand that what they did has consequences. More importantly, the airline needs to recognize this wasn't a one-off. It's a pattern." She glanced across the aisle at Eleanor, who had fallen asleep with her arms folded and her notebook nestled in her lap. If a 70-something retired statistics professor can track discriminatory patterns on her own, Celeste added, imagine what a well-funded legal team could uncover with the right pressure. Malcolm looked at her. The woman he had built a life with, raised a son with, supported through every challenge. He had always admired the fire in her. It was what drew him to her in law school, and it still burned bright 2 decades later. "You're right," he said gently. "Just don't let it take over our whole weekend. We haven't had a real family trip in forever. I want us to enjoy Bay Ridge, even if only for a few days." Celeste softened, reaching for his hand. "I promise. Your presentation first, then Jaden's campus tour, then our Napa Ridge day trip. The airline drama stays on the back burner until we're home." The rest of the flight passed uneventfully. Malcolm managed to close his eyes for about an hour, drifting lightly in and out of sleep. When the captain finally announced their descent, sunlight was spilling across the cabin as the plane began its approach over the bay. Through the window, Malcolm saw Golden Coast Bay below them, bridges stretching between mist-tipped hills, the sparkling water catching early afternoon light. The sight stirred something familiar inside him. Anticipation. Purpose. Beside him, Celeste was already gathering her tablet and purse. Across the aisle, Jaden had woken and was laughing softly with Eleanor over something on his phone. In less than 24 hours, Malcolm would present research that had taken half a decade to develop. A project that could change the way doctors detected and treated early cognitive decline. A breakthrough born from hundreds of late nights, failed hypotheses, and stubborn hope. As the plane touched down with a smooth bump, the cabin filled with the soft, collective exhale of relieved travelers. The usual light applause followed. Malcolm smiled faintly. Some things never changed. While the plane taxied to the gate, he centered himself. He'd mentally shelved the morning's tension, at least for now. The work deserved his full attention. When the seatbelt sign chimed off, the aisle quickly filled with first-class passengers gathering coats, bags, and laptops. Malcolm stood and helped Eleanor retrieve her small suitcase. "Thank you, dear," she said, adjusting her grip on her cane. "Are you renting a car?" "We arranged a car service," Celeste replied, stepping beside them. "And you?" "My son lives in Haven Crest Heights," Eleanor said with a proud smile. "He's meeting me at baggage claim." She reached into her purse and pulled out an elegant business card. "If you find yourselves with a free evening while you're in town, come for dinner. He's hopeless in the kitchen, but thankfully his husband is a professional chef, and the view from their terrace is worth the drive." Celeste accepted the card warmly. "That's very kind. We'd love to." As the trio moved forward, stepping into the jet bridge, Malcolm glanced back once more at the first-class cabin. It looked just as it had on takeoff, but it somehow felt different, as if, in claiming the space that had been denied to them, they had changed the air around them, just a little. And that, he thought, was worth something. "If you have a free evening, we'd love to have you for dinner," Eleanor said with a warm smile. "Richard's a hopeless cook, but thankfully he married a chef. Plus, the view of Golden Coast Bay from their terrace makes up for anything he burns." Celeste accepted the card with genuine warmth. "That's incredibly kind of you. We'll take a look at our schedule and give you a call." The four of them walked up the jet bridge together, emerging into the bustling terminal of San Francisco International Airport. As they reached the main concourse, Eleanor began to slow, preparing to part ways. "It was a real pleasure meeting all of you," she said sincerely, even if the circumstances could have been better. She clasped each of their hands in turn. When she reached Jaden, she held his gaze a little longer. "Young man," she said softly, "you're lucky to have parents who move through this world with such grace. Watch them. Learn from them. It's a masterclass in dignity." Jaden nodded, unusually solemn. "Yes, ma'am." "I know." With one last wave, Eleanor melted into the river of travelers moving toward baggage claim, her graceful figure disappearing into the crowd. "I like her," Jaden said, slinging his backpack over one shoulder. "She's like a ninja grandma. Pearls and politeness on the outside, but she strikes with statistics." Celeste laughed, the sound easing some of the tension she'd been carrying since Atlanta. A reminder not to judge anyone by appearances, in either direction. The Grant family continued through the terminal, following signs toward ground transportation. Malcolm found himself scanning the crowd subconsciously, a reflex born from decades of navigating predominantly white spaces. The airport was a whirlwind of movement, business travelers striding with purpose, families herding kids and carry-ons, airline staff gliding through it all like seasoned dancers. Near the exit to the transportation hub, Malcolm's gaze caught on a familiar head of stiffly coiffed blonde hair, and he tensed. Colleen, the gate agent from Atlanta, was standing near another airline employee, gesturing animatedly. As if sensing she was being watched, her eyes flicked up and landed on Malcolm. Her face paled, then quickly turned away. Malcolm placed a calming hand on Celeste's shoulder, anticipating her reaction. "There's our driver," he said smoothly, guiding the family toward a man holding a sign that read "Grant" in bold letters. The chauffeur, a middle-aged Punjabi man with a neatly trimmed beard, stepped forward with a warm smile. "Dr. and Mrs. Grant, welcome to San Francisco. I'm Amrit. May I take your bags?" His polite professionalism was a balm after the morning's tension. "Thank you, Amrit," Malcolm replied, handing over their carry-ons. "We've got checked bags to collect, too." "Of course, sir. I'll bring the car around. When you're ready to be picked up, just text me at this number." Amrit handed Malcolm a card and departed with their smaller luggage. The baggage claim area buzzed with the usual orchestrated chaos. Luggage carousels spinning slowly, announcements echoing through the hall, families and friends reuniting with hugs and chatter. Malcolm checked the screen and directed the family to Carousel 4, where their flight's bags would arrive. As they waited, Celeste's phone chimed. She glanced at the screen. Her face darkened as she read. "What is it?" Malcolm asked, immediately alert. Without a word, she handed him the phone. The subject line read, "Regarding your experience today." The email was from Delta Airlines customer service. "Dear Mrs. Grant, we've been made aware of a situation that occurred during the boarding process for your flight to San Francisco this morning. On behalf of Delta Airlines, I would like to extend our sincere apologies for any misunderstanding regarding your seating assignments. Our records indicate that your family was initially informed of a possible seating discrepancy, which was promptly resolved prior to boarding. We strive to offer excellent service to all passengers and regret any inconvenience or discomfort caused by this incident. As a gesture of goodwill, we would like to offer each member of your family 5,000 Sky Miles, which will be credited to your accounts within 30 to 35 business days. Should you have further questions, please contact our customer care department. Sincerely, Daniel Wright, Customer Relations Manager, Delta Airlines." Malcolm read it twice, noting what was not said. No mention of Colleen's behavior. No acknowledgement that they'd been accused of lying. No credit to Eleanor's intervention. Just a carefully worded brush-off. "A misunderstanding," Celeste repeated bitterly. "That's what they're calling it." "And apparently," Malcolm added, "being publicly humiliated is worth about $50 in Sky Miles." Jaden, reading over his father's shoulder, frowned. "They're already trying to spin it, minimize it, make it go away." "Standard damage control," Celeste said flatly, pocketing her phone. "Acknowledge without admitting fault. Offer a token. Close the file." Malcolm exhaled, the frustration he'd worked so hard to shed now coiling back inside. "What do you want to do?" Before Celeste could answer, their attention was pulled toward a disturbance near the terminal's entrance. A cluster of airline employees stood in tense conversation. One voice cut through the murmur. "It's already going viral." Among the group, Malcolm recognized Travis, the gate supervisor from Atlanta. He was speaking into a phone, his complexion pale, his free hand raking nervously through his hair. "Isn't that—" Jaden began, but Celeste was already striding toward the group, heels clicking with purpose. Malcolm followed, his gut tight with unease. As they neared, they picked up fragments of conversation. PR situation now. Social media's running with it. Who was filming? Travis looked up, saw them, and quickly ended his call. His professional smile snapped into place, but his body language betrayed him. Tense, alert. "Dr. and Mrs. Grant," he said, voice tight. "I was hoping to speak with you. I understand you received our email." "We did," Celeste replied, her tone icy. And, frankly, it was an insufficient response. "Wouldn't you agree?" Travis glanced at his co-workers, then lowered his voice. "If we could speak privately for a moment." Celeste crossed her arms. "Anything you have to say can be said right here." The standoff might have continued, but Malcolm touched her arm gently. "Let's hear him out," he murmured. To Travis, he added, "We can step over there." Travis gave a tense nod and gestured toward a quieter corner of the terminal, away from the carousel. As they walked, Malcolm glanced at his wife's set jaw and his son's watchful eyes. Whatever happened next, he knew this wasn't just about their family anymore. It was about the story taking shape online, the pattern that Eleanor had named, and the people watching. Travis led them to a quieter corner near a small coffee kiosk. Once they were out of earshot for most travelers, the polished professionalism on his face cracked slightly, revealing something more raw. Genuine unease. "I want to personally apologize for what happened back in Atlanta," he began, voice low but urgent. There's no excuse for it." The blunt honesty, no euphemisms, no corporate detours, caught Malcolm off guard. But Celeste was unmoved. "You're right," she said coolly. "There isn't. So why the sudden change of heart? An hour ago, it was just a computer error." Travis hesitated, clearly debating how much to share. Then, with a resigned breath, he reached for his phone. "Because someone posted a video of the entire incident on Twitter. It's already been shared over 20,000 times." He held up the phone and played the clip. The footage was clearer than they expected, captured by someone seated near the gate. It followed the entire exchange, from Colleen first scrutinizing their boarding passes, to Travis's arrival, to Eleanor Whitmore's eloquent interjection. The camera occasionally swept the crowd, catching the awkward shifting of bystanders, a few nodding in agreement with Eleanor's pointed remarks about how computer errors tend to disproportionately affect passengers of color. From this new vantage point, Malcolm saw the subtext laid bare. What had felt like personal humiliation was now documented evidence of a much larger pattern. The video ended with the overlay. "Watched this black family with confirmed first-class tickets be told they had to fly economy due to a computer error until an elderly white woman stepped in. This is what systemic racism looks like." Flying, while Black Travis locked his phone and lowered his voice further. The company's concerned. "With our current diversity initiatives, this kind of publicity could be—" He didn't finish the sentence. "We're listening," Celeste said, her courtroom instincts sharp and alert. "A full refund of your outbound tickets," Travis said quickly as if from memory. "Upgraded return flight if not already booked, and 25,000 bonus sky miles for each of you. Additionally, our regional director would like to issue a formal apology, in person if possible." Jaden, who had been quietly observing, suddenly spoke up. "What about Colleen?" Travis blinked, caught off guard by the teenager. That's an internal matter." Jaden's eyes narrowed. "Which means nothing will happen. She'll get a polite warning, maybe sit through a diversity training video, and then do the same thing to the next black family that walks up with a first-class ticket." The cynicism in his voice carried more weight than someone his age should have to bear. Malcolm felt it like a stone in his chest, the toll of 1,000 small injustices already shaping his son's worldview. "That's not true," Travis said, but his eyes didn't match his words. He looked down. Celeste's voice sliced through the pause, deliberate and composed. "What we experienced today wasn't just poor customer service, Mr. Travis. It was discrimination, clear and simple. Your gate agent made assumptions about us based on our race. Then she manufactured a system error to justify shunting us to the back of the plane. And when challenged, you defended her fiction instead of investigating." Travis's face tightened, but he didn't argue. Celeste pressed on. "Now that there's public evidence, the airline is offering compensation to make it all go away. But money doesn't fix the problem. It doesn't erase the fact that your employees feel empowered to act on bias without fear of consequence." Travis looked down at his shoes, then back up. "What would you suggest?" And this time, Malcolm heard something real under the corporate mask. Actual curiosity. Celeste paused, then answered carefully. "Transparent action. A public acknowledgement of what happened and why it was wrong. Concrete updates to your employee training. Real accountability. Not punishment for optics, but actual deterrence. I'm less interested in retribution than in preventing this from happening to another family." Travis nodded slowly, the weight of the moment clear on his face. "I'll bring your recommendations to our leadership. In the meantime, I've been authorized to process the compensation now." "We'll think about it," Celeste said. Her voice made clear. This conversation wasn't over. "You can reach us at our hotel after we've had time to consider our options." Travis stepped away, leaving them alone again. Malcolm turned to his wife with both admiration and concern. "Are you planning to pursue this legally?" Her expression softened. "I'm planning to use the leverage we currently have to demand something meaningful. Not headlines, not hush money, change. And no, I'm not suing anyone unless they try to stonewall us." She gave his arm a reassuring squeeze. "Your presentation comes first. Remember, I promised." Behind them, the carousel had started to turn. Jaden moved quickly, spotting their matching navy bags and hauling them down. As the family regrouped, Malcolm's phone buzzed. Unknown number, San Francisco area code. He stepped a few feet away to answer. "This is Dr. Grant." A woman's voice, crisp and composed, came through the line. "Dr. Grant, my name is Camille Rodriguez. I'm a journalist with the San Francisco Chronicle. I understand you and your family experienced a disturbing incident this morning while boarding your flight from Atlanta, and that it's gained some attention online." Malcolm tensed. "How did you get this number?" A pause. "Someone who witnessed the incident shared it, believing you might want the opportunity to speak. If this is a bad time, I completely understand. But we're working on a larger story examining discrimination in the airline industry, and your insight would be extremely valuable." He exhaled slowly. There it was, the choice. On one hand, speaking out could pressure the airline toward accountability. On the other, it would put his family in a spotlight they hadn't asked for. "Ms. Rodriguez," he said carefully, "I appreciate your interest, but we've just arrived in San Francisco. I'm here to deliver a keynote presentation at a major medical conference. That's my focus right now." "Of course," Camille responded smoothly. "The conference on neurodegenerative disorders at the Masson Center, your research on early-onset Alzheimer's is truly groundbreaking, from what I understand. Perhaps we could connect after your keynote. This story, it isn't just about one gate agent. It's about the larger patterns of discrimination that persist, even in spaces that call themselves progressive." Malcolm was momentarily disarmed by how much the reporter knew, not just about the incident, but about his work. Nearby, Celeste noticed the shift in his expression and moved closer, brows raised in silent inquiry. He covered the phone and murmured, "Reporter from the Chronicle. She knows about the gate situation and the research." Celeste gave a subtle nod, leaving the decision to him. "Ms. Rodriguez," Malcolm said into the phone, "I'll need to discuss this with my family. May I call you later today?" "Absolutely. And, Dr. Grant, please know, we're approaching this story with care. We're not chasing a headline. We're looking for accountability. Your voice could help others who experience the same thing, but don't have a platform to be heard." Her words landed exactly where she intended, on Malcolm's deep sense of duty. Responsibility to his community was something he'd quietly carried for decades, and something he'd worked hard to pass on to Jaden. "I'll consider it," Malcolm replied. "Thank you for reaching out." As he ended the call, Hargett texted that he was waiting curbside at the pickup area. The family gathered their bags and navigated the busy terminal, each absorbed in their thoughts. Outside, the San Francisco air greeted them with its signature blend of salty coolness and urban electricity. Hargett stood beside a sleek black SUV, already lifting their bags into the trunk with practiced grace. "To the Fairmont," he confirmed, holding the passenger door open for Celeste. "Yes, please," Malcolm replied, sliding into the front seat as his wife and son settled in behind him. As the vehicle pulled away from the curb and merged into airport traffic, Malcolm gazed at the rolling hills and distant skyline, his mind racing through a tangle of competing priorities. His keynote tomorrow, the gate incident, the video, the reporter, and Jaden's upcoming tour of Stanford. Dad? Malcolm turned, startled from his thoughts. Jaden leaned forward, his tone quiet but firm. "That reporter? Are you going to talk to her?" "I don't know," Malcolm said honestly. "What do you think?" Jaden paused, thoughtful in a way that reminded Malcolm he wasn't a kid anymore. "I think it matters. Not just for us, but for people who don't have law degrees or medical degrees or a viral video to make companies pay attention." Celeste reached across the seat to place a hand gently on their son's shoulder. Pride glowed behind her eyes. "It does matter," she agreed, "but it also comes with costs. Once a story like this goes public, we lose control. We stop being people. We become a narrative in someone else's version of the truth. We already are, Jaden said, meeting her gaze. That video's out there. It didn't ask our permission. Malcolm exhaled, recognizing the truth in his son's words. The story was already spinning through cyberspace, already being shaped by strangers. Perhaps the only way to reclaim some agency was to step into it deliberately. "Let's see how things unfold," he said. "We'll make the decision together. As a family." The SUV climbed San Francisco's iconic hills, past rows of painted Victorians and glimpses of the glittering bay between buildings. Despite the emotional weight of the morning, Malcolm felt a growing current of anticipation. His work, 5 years of sleepless nights and relentless research, was about to be unveiled. Jaden was about to tour a university that might define his future. And maybe, just maybe, they'd help spark a wider conversation. The Fairmont rose into view, its grand flags fluttering against the bright blue sky. Malcolm made a quiet decision as they approached. The gate incident would not define this trip. He would face it, yes, but it wouldn't overshadow the purpose of why they came, or rob them of the joy of being together. The SUV rolled to a smooth stop in front of the historic hotel. A pair of doormen approached with polished ease. "Welcome to the Fairmont, Dr. Grant," one greeted. "We're honored to host you during the conference." There was no hesitation in his tone, no flicker of surprise, just simple professional respect, a small but meaningful balm after the morning's assumptions. Malcolm smiled, genuine and unguarded. He turned to help Celeste from the vehicle. Together, the Grant family stepped through the grand entrance, ready for the days ahead, on their own terms, with the quiet dignity that had always carried them through. The next morning dawned clear and brilliant, the city bathed in golden light. The infamous San Francisco fog had pulled back, revealing a glimmering bay and crisp blue skies. Inside their suite, Malcolm stood at the window already dressed. Charcoal suit, white shirt, and the familiar blue tie with tiny diamonds, the one Jaden had teased him about but that he always wore on presentation days. Behind him, Celeste emerged from the bathroom, steam curling behind her like stage fog. Wrapped in a plush hotel robe, she moved beside him at the window, inhaling the scent of the sea. "Beautiful day," she said softly. "How are you feeling about the presentation?" Malcolm turned, offering a smile that carried nerves and excitement in equal measure. "Ready. A little jittery, but in the good way." She studied him, her eyes searching beneath his answer. "And the other matter? Has it settled in your mind?" He knew what she meant. The incident at the gate, which had exploded online overnight. According to Jaden, who had been tracking the hashtags, the video had now surpassed 1 million views. Commentators were flooding social media, dissecting every word, every facial expression. The airline had issued a vague, formal statement. Regret for the misunderstanding. A generic promise to strive for better. Acknowledging everything and saying nothing. "It's compartmentalized," Malcolm said. "Today is about the research. That's all." Celeste nodded, accepting his resolve. "Jaden wants to come to your keynote this morning," she added, "before we head over to Stanford. Is that okay?" "More than okay," Malcolm replied, touched. "It means the world." Malcolm smiled, genuinely touched, though a part of him doubted how exciting Jaden would find an in-depth exploration of biomarkers for neurodegeneration. "He wants to see his father in his element," Celeste said simply. "That's reason enough." A knock at the connecting door interrupted the moment. "Parents, are you decent?" came Jaden's voice. "Come in," Celeste called out, cinching the belt of her robe tighter. Jaden stepped in, dressed in dark jeans and a pressed button-up, his own version of dressing up for his Stanford visit. "Morning, Dad. Your phone's blowing up. I think the conference folks are trying to get hold of you." Malcolm grabbed his phone off the nightstand. The screen was littered with missed calls and texts, mostly from Dr. Mei Chen, the symposium chair. The latest message read, "Malcolm, please call ASAP. Important update about your keynote." "That's strange," Malcolm murmured as he dialed. Dr. Chen picked up on the first ring. "Malcolm, thank you for getting back to me. I've been trying to reach you all morning." "Apologies, I had my phone on silent overnight. Is something wrong with the schedule?" There was a pause. Her tone turned neutral. "There's been a development. Your talk has received a spike in interest. We've moved it to the main hall to accommodate the surge." Malcolm's brows knit together. Surge? The schedule was finalized weeks ago. What changed? Another pause. Longer this time. "Are you aware there's a video online?" she said gently. Malcolm closed his eyes. "The airport?" "Yes." "But it's not negative," she assured quickly. "If anything, it's galvanized support. Attendance requests for your session tripled overnight. There's also some media attention, which we're managing quietly." She softened her voice. "I want you to know, none of this diminishes your research. In fact, more people will now hear about it. That's a silver lining, I hope." But Malcolm felt the compartment walls in his mind begin to crack. He had fought to ensure his work stood on its own merit, not as a reaction to injustice, not as a symbol of resilience, just as science. "I appreciate the support, May, but I'd really prefer to keep the spotlight on the research. No media in the presentation room, please." "Already arranged," she said with relief. "Your session remains strictly academic. The venue change is purely for capacity." She hesitated. "One more thing. The organizing committee would like to issue a statement expressing support for you and reinforcing equity in scientific spaces. Would you be open to that?" Malcolm felt the familiar, exhausting weight of representation settle across his shoulders. That constant burden of being not just a doctor, but a black doctor whose personal struggles would be interpreted as the black experience. "I need to think about it," he said truthfully. "Can I let you know after I present?" "Of course," she said kindly. "Your session's at 10:30 in Hall A. We'll have your slides loaded and ready by 10 if you want to run through things." After hanging up, Malcolm turned to see Celeste and Jaden watching him carefully. "They've moved my talk to the main hall," he said, trying to sound casual. "Apparently I'm trending for reasons that have nothing to do with neurons." Celeste's eyes softened with understanding. "It's fine," he said quickly. Too quickly. Then, catching himself, he sighed. "Sorry, I want people to hear the work for what it is, not as a reaction to some viral controversy." Jaden stepped forward, his tone steady. "Dad, people showing up doesn't erase your work. It just means more people hear it." Malcolm offered a small smile, touched. "When did you get so wise?" "I've had good teachers," Jaden said simply. They finished getting ready, avoiding further discussion of the airport or the unexpected shift in the conference schedule. By the time they stepped out into the crisp morning air, Malcolm had mentally rebuilt his internal walls, determined to give his talk just as he had planned, before the trip had taken its chaotic turn. The Moscone Center was alive with energy. Thousands of medical professionals filled the massive complex, exchanging ideas and breakthroughs. Under normal circumstances, Malcolm would have felt invigorated. But today, he couldn't shake the whispers and glances that followed him. Not from strangers, but colleagues who now recognized him not just from journals or conference circuits, but from the video. "Dr. Grant," called a voice from behind as they neared the registration area. Malcolm turned to see Dr. Elias Ramirez, a fellow neuroscientist from Johns Hopkins, hurrying over with a warm smile. "I was hoping to catch you before your talk." Malcolm returned the greeting, introducing Celeste and Jaden. To his credit, Dr. Ramirez said nothing about the incident. Their conversation focused solely on research updates and mutual colleagues. That moment of normalcy helped Malcolm center himself again. Here, he was still Dr. Grant, not a trending topic. After picking up their badges, the family followed signs to Hall A. The room was massive, far larger than the seminar space initially assigned. Rows upon rows of chairs, lighting rigs, multiple projection screens, and a professional AV crew buzzing with activity. Dr. Chen crossed the hall and approached, composed but clearly concerned. "Thank you for being so flexible," she said sincerely. "Your slides have been transferred to the main system. Everything's tested and ready." "Thank you, May," Malcolm said, his voice steady again. "I'd like to walk through the transitions, just once." "Of course, the booth is waiting for you." She turned to Celeste and Jaden with a welcoming smile. "We've reserved front row seats. You're welcome to take them now. We'll begin in about 40 minutes. "You've got this," Celeste whispered, catching Malcolm's hand for a brief, grounding squeeze. He nodded, heart steadying at the simple affirmation, and followed Dr. Chen up the stage stairs toward the podium. The technical crew greeted him with quick nods and quiet efficiency. As he reviewed his slides one last time, something shifted inside him. Familiarity returned. This was his world. Here, he was not a spectacle. He was a scientist. By the time the hall began to fill, Malcolm felt a renewed sense of calm. He stood off stage, observing as the room swelled with attendees, faces both familiar and unfamiliar. Some were longtime colleagues, others young researchers likely drawn in by the sudden attention his name had received. There were more people of color than he usually saw at neurology symposia. He wasn't sure whether to feel heartened or wary. Dr. Chen appeared at his side, tablet in hand, her expression impressed. "We're at capacity," she told him. "There's even a wait list. I've never seen this kind of turnout for a neurodegenerative session, not even for a keynote." Malcolm offered a polite nod, uncertain how to respond. The data he would present was worthy of attention, yes, but was that why they were all here? "It's time," Dr. Chen said softly, touching his arm. "Ready?" He gave a final tug to his tie, the one Jaden had mocked just the day before, and nodded. "I'm ready." Dr. Chen took the stage, greeted by warm applause. She approached the podium with the poise of someone well-versed in introducing giants in their field. "Good morning, colleagues, and welcome to today's keynote session on emerging research in neurodegenerative disease," she began. "It is a great privilege to introduce our speaker, Dr. Malcolm Grant from Lanier University, whose groundbreaking research on early biomarkers for Alzheimer's has the potential to transform diagnosis and intervention worldwide." As she recounted his accolades, peer-reviewed publications, cross-institutional collaborations, research grants, Malcolm took a deep breath backstage. In the front row, he saw Celeste and Jaden, pride radiating from their faces. 2 seats over, to his quiet surprise, sat Margaret Whitfield, the sharp-eyed retired professor who had stood by them at the airport. She caught his gaze and gave a small nod, serene and certain. "Please join me in welcoming Dr. Malcolm Grant," Dr. Chen concluded, stepping back. Applause filled the room. Malcolm walked onto the stage with steady, confident strides. He adjusted his notes, surveyed the packed audience, and began. "Alzheimer's doesn't just erode memory. It erases identity. It severs relationships. It steals futures." The hall went still, riveted. And when it strikes early, patients in their 40s or 50s, it robs them of what should be the most meaningful, productive years of their lives. Whatever had brought the audience into the room, viral videos, curiosity, solidarity, they were now present for the science. Today, I'll be sharing the findings of a 5-year longitudinal study that identified a constellation of novel biomarkers, detected as early as 15 years before clinical symptoms emerge. This offers a profound opportunity for intervention before irreversible cognitive decline begins. As Malcolm advanced through the slides, his voice grew steadier, more assured. The data points, charts, and case profiles were etched into his bones. This was the culmination of 5 years of tireless work. For these few minutes, he was just Dr. Grant. Not a headline, not a trending tag, not a cautionary tale. When he reached the key findings revealing statistical significance across all 3 cohorts, a hum of excitement rippled through the room, the scientific equivalent of applause. "These results have been replicated in 3 independent populations," Malcolm said, clicking to a side-by-side comparison of data. Notably, they held across diverse demographics: race, income, education levels. This is critical if we are to build tools that serve all patients, not just the ones who historically have had access to specialized care. As he said the words, Malcolm felt their weight hit a little harder than usual. Equity in medical research had always been a cornerstone of his team's work, but today it no longer felt like an abstract principle. It felt deeply personal. He paused, took a sip of water, then set down the bottle with quiet resolve. Before we move on to treatment pathways, I want to speak directly to why inclusive study design matters so much. A slight shift in the room. People leaned in. Too often, diagnostic tools are developed using data from homogeneous populations, primarily white, affluent, and well-educated. When those tools are applied to broader populations, they frequently fail. They fail because they weren't built for everyone. He let that sit for a moment. Across the room, he saw Margaret give the faintest approving nod. We made a choice. We built our cohorts to reflect the real world. That required more funding, more time, and more complex statistical analysis. But now, when we say these biomarkers predict early-onset Alzheimer's, we can say that with confidence, for everyone, not just some. There was a pause. Then a single hand clapped, then another, then dozens. Not a standing ovation, but a gesture of respect from a room that understood the gravity of what he had said and why he had said it. Malcolm exhaled, a slight smile on his lips, and returned to the final section of his talk, focusing on potential treatments and next steps. By the time Dr. Malcolm Grant reached the conclusion of his presentation, summarizing how their discovery could reshape early Alzheimer's detection and treatment, the room practically buzzed with collective enthusiasm. "Thank you for your attention," he said simply, stepping back from the microphone. "I welcome your questions." Applause erupted, sustained and genuine, not out of politeness but respect, the kind of applause that acknowledged real impact. When it faded, hands immediately shot up across the room. Scholars, clinicians, and young researchers all eager to engage. Malcolm pointed toward a familiar face near the front. "Dr. Khatri," he said, recognizing the renowned Stanford researcher. "Dr. Grant, congratulations," Khatri began, voice clear and thoughtful. "I'm particularly intrigued by the temporal dynamics. Were you able to observe stability in these biomarkers over time, within the same patients?" Exactly the kind of question Malcolm had hoped for. Substantive, scientific. No mention of the news cycle, the airport incident, or social media buzz. Just pure inquiry. He launched into a thorough response, referencing secondary datasets and longitudinal trends his team had mapped. For the next 20 minutes, the room transformed into a forum of ideas and exploration. Questions came rapid-fire, but always with respect. Testing methods, examining implications, suggesting collaboration. If anyone had come curious because of the viral video, they stayed for the science. Malcolm was grateful for it. Deeply. As time wore on, Dr. Chen returned to the stage. "We have time for one final question," she said, scanning the room. A hand rose toward the back. A young woman in her late 20s stood, notebook in hand. "Dr. Grant, thank you for a powerful and accessible presentation," she said. "My question is about implementation. Given the advanced imaging your protocol currently requires, how do you see this being translated into low-resource settings? Because early detection only matters if intervention is actually accessible." Malcolm felt his pulse steady. It was a brilliant question, the kind he valued most, one that pushed the work toward equity. "That's an essential consideration," he replied. The testing methods we've used are indeed complex, but our next phase focuses on creating streamlined protocols that can be deployed in community clinics and primary care offices, even where resources are limited. He spoke passionately about partnerships with public health organizations, pilot programs already in the works, and their commitment to avoiding the all-too-familiar pitfall of breakthroughs that only serve the privileged. This work has to matter for everyone. Not just for patients at teaching hospitals, he concluded. He could feel it again. The rightness of this moment. The completeness of what he had come to do. The science had spoken for itself. Dr. Chen returned to the mic. Please join me in thanking Dr. Grant for his remarkable contribution. Another round of applause filled the hall, heartfelt and loud. She continued. For those who'd like to engage further, Dr. Grant will be at the Neurodegenerative Disorders poster session in Exhibition Hall B from 2 to 3:30 p.m. As the crowd began to filter out, many stopped to exchange impressions with colleagues. Meanwhile, Malcolm descended the stage steps to meet Celeste and Jaden. That was phenomenal, Celeste said, giving him a quick, proud embrace. You connected the dots so seamlessly, data, design, equity, and you didn't let anything recent distract from the work. Jaden grinned. Even I got most of it, and I'm still recovering from a C in AP Bio. Malcolm chuckled, tension finally leaving his shoulders. That's high praise. As they spoke, Margaret Whitfield approached, elegant as ever in a slate-gray suit and soft pearls, leaning lightly on her cane. Dr. Grant, she said, her eyes warm. That was simply fascinating. My late husband would have been beside himself with excitement. He always said the greatest tragedy of early-onset Alzheimer's was how little time doctors had to act. I'm honored you came, Malcolm said, genuinely moved. I didn't expect to see you again so soon. Margaret smiled knowingly. I make a habit of showing up for people who stand tall, both on and off the podium. Besides, just because I'm retired doesn't mean I've stopped being curious. Before Malcolm could respond, Dr. Chen reappeared, looking apologetic but focused. I'm so sorry to interrupt, she said. Several colleagues are waiting to speak with you. There's interest from NIH and a few universities as well. Of course, Malcolm said. Turning to his family, he added, Jaden, what time is your Stanford tour again? 2, his son replied. But don't worry, you stay as long as you need. Mom can take me. Celeste nodded. We'll meet you back at the hotel around 5, unless you message otherwise. As they began to part, Malcolm paused. Actually, wait, Dr. Chen, would it be possible for Jaden to meet a few of those NIH researchers? He's thinking of pre-med, and a conversation like that could be meaningful. Chen's face lit up. Absolutely. They're right over there, just finishing a conversation. She gestured to a small group near the stage. Jaden's eyes widened. Dad, are you sure? They're probably dealing with big stuff. I'm just a high schooler. Malcolm placed a hand on his shoulder. You're not just anything. And trust me, scientists love talking to curious young people. He smiled. Just ask them what they think about 3D visualizations versus standard graphs for complex biomarker modeling. Jaden blinked. I didn't ask anything about that. Malcolm winked. You will. Then just watch what happens. Celeste laughed. That's sneaky and brilliant. I'll stay with him while you work the room. Then we'll head out to the tour. As Malcolm turned toward the researchers waiting to meet him, colleagues from the NIH, Germany, and one from South Korea, he cast a glance back. Jaden stood in a small circle, initially tentative, but quickly swept into an animated discussion. One of the researchers showed him something on a tablet. Another handed him a business card. Malcolm felt an ache in his chest, some mixture of pride, awe, and something heavier. His son was growing into his own space. Would Jaden face the same coded questions, the same doubted credentials, the same subtle walls that Malcolm had spent a career learning to navigate? Almost certainly. But maybe, just maybe, thanks to allies like Margaret, to mentors in unexpected places, and to rooms like this, he'd walk through some of those doors a little more freely. After about 30 minutes of energizing conversations and handshakes with colleagues, Dr. Malcolm Grant excused himself to reconnect with Celeste and Jaden, who were just about ready to head to Stanford. "How'd it go?" he asked his son. Jaden's eyes were wide with excitement. "Dad, Dr. Patel showed me this insane new brain imaging technique. It's like a real-time 3D neural map. And she said if I'm serious about med school, I should email her for a summer internship after freshman year." Malcolm raised his eyebrows, pleasantly surprised. "Sounds like you made quite the impression." Jaden grinned. "I asked that question you told me to, about data visualization. Worked like magic. They debated rendering styles for 15 minutes. Celeste glanced at her watch. "We'd better head out or we'll be late for the tour," she said. "Malcolm, are you coming with us or staying for more sessions?" Malcolm paused, weighing his options. His next formal appearance wasn't until the poster session at 2 p.m., which left a couple of hours to spare. Normally, he'd use the time to support colleagues' talks or attend sessions in adjacent fields. But today, after everything, they all needed space, time to think, to breathe. The Chronicle reporter had messaged again during his presentation, politely requesting a brief interview. Meanwhile, a voicemail from Delta's customer relations line hinted that a senior executive wanted to speak with him. His inbox was packed with notes, some supportive, some emotional, from fellow professionals who had endured similar indignities. "I think I'll find a quiet spot and decompress," he said. "Catch up on a few messages before the poster session." "Good call," Celeste replied, touching his arm. "We'll see you back at the hotel later." She gave him a quick kiss and Jaden offered a fist bump before they disappeared into the crowd. Now alone, Malcolm wandered out of the main conference area and found a quiet lounge near a wide window overlooking the downtown skyline. He settled into a soft armchair and pulled out his phone. Dozens of unread messages waited, colleagues offering support, others asking questions about his keynote, and a few sharing their own stories of airport errors. He was just beginning to reply when his phone buzzed with an incoming call, a number he didn't recognize. He hesitated, then answered. "Dr. Grant speaking. Dr. Grant, this is Thomas Wilson, Executive Vice President for Customer Experience at Sky Atlantic Airlines. Thank you for taking my call. I wanted to personally address the incident you and your family experienced yesterday at Portwell International." Malcolm sat upright, instantly alert. This wasn't some customer service manager. It was an executive several rungs up the corporate ladder. "I appreciate you reaching out," Malcolm replied, his tone measured. "I'm listening. What occurred at the gate was completely unacceptable," Wilson continued, his voice calm but firm. "It violated both our service standards and our core values. I want to extend my unreserved apology, personally and on behalf of Sky Atlantic." The directness of the apology surprised Malcolm. No euphemisms, no vague references to procedural confusion. "Thank you," Malcolm said cautiously. "May I ask what prompted this change in tone from the message we received yesterday?" There was a brief pause on the other end. "Frankly, Dr. Grant, several things have changed," Wilson admitted. "The video of the incident has gone viral. It's been shared by major media outlets, viewed millions of times. But more importantly, after reviewing the situation internally, we've confirmed that your tickets were fully valid. There was no system error. Your boarding passes were correctly issued. The mistake wasn't digital. It was human." Malcolm felt the words land with unexpected weight. "I see," he said simply. "So what now?" "We're taking multiple steps," Wilson continued. "First, the employees involved have been placed on administrative leave while we complete our investigation and determine appropriate consequences. Second, we've launched a full audit of similar error claims over the past 12 months to uncover potential patterns. And third, we're implementing enhanced training on implicit bias and equity for all frontline staff." Malcolm remained quiet for a moment. These weren't token gestures. They were real policy moves. He was impressed, but not naive. The question remained. Was this sincere change or PR-driven damage control? "Those sound like promising steps," he replied carefully. "But I have to ask, why now? Why such a comprehensive shift today?" Wilson sighed, and this time his voice held something more vulnerable. "Because the first response was inadequate," he admitted. "It followed a templated protocol, standard practice for basic service complaints. But once senior leadership saw the footage, we recognized the deeper reality. This wasn't a seat mix-up. It was discrimination, plain and simple." Malcolm appreciated the honesty. It was rare to hear that kind of blunt accountability, especially from someone in Wilson's position. He considered his response, recalling Celeste's legal instincts and Jaden's quiet frustration at how quickly corporations tried to move on. "Mr. Wilson," he said, "I respect your candor. I do. And I understand the complexities of running a company at scale. But for families like mine, this wasn't just a mistake. It was part of a long pattern. One we've been silently working around for decades." "I understand," Wilson replied. "And I want to be clear. We are not brushing this aside. We want to make it right. More than that, we want to make it different moving forward." Malcolm leaned back, eyes on the skyline. He thought about his presentation that morning, about the room full of minds hungry for truth. He thought about the hundreds of people, strangers, who had stood in support not just of his work, but of his dignity. "I hope your company means that," he said finally, "because what happens next matters." Malcolm had boarded the plane expecting an uneventful journey centered around his research. He hadn't anticipated becoming the face of a viral conversation about race and bias in air travel. "I understand completely," said Thomas Wilson, Executive VP at Sky Atlantic Airlines, his voice steady on the other end of the line. "And I deeply regret that your professional journey was disrupted this way." "My wife is considering filing a formal complaint," Malcolm replied. "She's an attorney. She sees the broader pattern in what your staff did, one that's not isolated." "I understand," Wilson said after a thoughtful pause. "And beyond what I've already mentioned, we'd like to offer your family a full refund, complimentary first-class seats for your return, and 100,000 Sky Miles each." Wilson continued, but this time his tone shifted from corporate apology to something more engaged. "More importantly," he added, "we'd like to invite your input, and possibly your wife's professional expertise, to help us review and improve our anti-discrimination protocols and training. Our aim isn't just to address this incident, but to prevent others like it from happening again." That part, the invitation to participate in systemic change, gave Malcolm pause. It was more than compensation. It was an acknowledgement that they might actually want to do better. "That's a meaningful offer," Malcolm said, "but I'll need to speak with my wife first. She may have additional thoughts on what accountability should look like." "Of course," Wilson said. "Take your time. You're welcome to reach out directly on this line." As the call ended, Malcolm sat for a long moment, letting the silence settle around him. The airline's response had shifted dramatically in less than 24 hours, from dismissive apology to a full-fledged reckoning. Was it sincere, or just effective damage control? Maybe, he thought, the motivation wasn't as important as the impact. If it helped passengers of color get treated with dignity going forward, then it mattered. He was still reflecting when he noticed someone walking toward him, a woman moving with intention. She didn't look like a fellow attendee meandering between breakout sessions. As she came closer, he recognized her from her byline. Camille Rodriguez, from the Bayview Chronicle. "Dr. Grant?" she asked, though it was more a confirmation than a question. "I'm Camille Rodriguez. I hope you don't mind me approaching you here. I tried calling earlier, but the conference team pointed me this way." Malcolm gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Miss Rodriguez, I was planning to call you back. Please, sit." "Thank you," she said as she settled in. "I know your time is limited. I attended your keynote this morning, by the way. Fascinating work, even for a non-scientist." "I appreciate that," Malcolm said, studying her. She appeared to be in her mid-30s, dressed in a sleek blazer and blouse, her dark hair pulled into a neat ponytail. She exuded calm professionalism, curious but not intrusive. "I'll be direct," she said. "I'm working on a piece examining racial bias in elite spaces, airline cabins, luxury retail, corporate events. Unfortunately, what happened to your family isn't unique. But the fact that it was recorded, and that you're a respected professional, makes it a compelling lens through which readers can understand a larger pattern." Malcolm nodded. He wasn't surprised by her angle. "My wife and I have had more than our share of computer errors," he said. "This one just happened to have an audience." "And that's exactly why your perspective matters," Camille said. "So many similar situations go undocumented. You have a platform and experience to articulate what this feels like from both a personal and professional standpoint. That's powerful." Malcolm found himself warming to her approach. She wasn't here to sensationalize. She was here to tell the truth, not just about what happened, but about what it meant. "I just got off the phone with a senior executive from the airline," he said, deciding to share. "Their response has shifted significantly since yesterday." Camille's eyebrows lifted, intrigued. "Really? Would you be willing to elaborate?" He recapped the conversation with Thomas Wilson, the shift from a generic apology to a full internal review and policy audit. As he spoke, Camille took light notes on a small pad, nodding occasionally. "That's a major development," she said once he finished. "It says a lot about how institutions only take real action when the pressure becomes public." "Exactly," Malcolm said. "That's why I'm cautious. We weren't even acknowledged until it became a PR crisis. Would you be comfortable sharing some of those insights for the article? Not the dollar amounts or internal promises, just your take on how these cases are usually handled?" He thought for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, I'm open to discussing the pattern, but I'd rather not make this about us squeezing maximum compensation out of one company. I want to help people see the systemic dynamic, how bias gets baked into supposedly neutral processes." "That's fair," Camille agreed, "and exactly the narrative I'm working to highlight. Your willingness to speak about that adds credibility." "It's not easy," Malcolm admitted. "The hardest part isn't the individual slight. It's the fact that no matter how many degrees you've earned or breakthroughs you've made, someone can still look at you and decide, you don't belong." Camille didn't interrupt. "You can do everything right," Malcolm continued, his voice steady, "and still find yourself fighting to be seen as legitimate. Not because of what's in your resume, but because of what's in your skin." Camille finally broke the silence. "Dr. Grant, that's exactly the clarity and depth this piece needs. If you're open to a more in-depth interview later this week, I'd love to schedule something when it's convenient for you and your family." "Let me speak with my wife first," Malcolm said. "She's very intentional about how our story gets told. But I'll consider it. Thank you. Truly." They shook hands, and Camille stood to leave. Malcolm watched her disappear into the crowd of conference-goers, then leaned back in his seat, the buzz of messages still humming in his phone. His story had already gone public. But maybe, just maybe, now it had the chance to go meaningfully public. Malcolm sat across from Camille Rodriguez, unexpectedly deep into a conversation that blurred the lines between the personal and the professional. What had begun as a media inquiry had evolved into something more layered, an honest exchange about the complexities of success, race, and resilience. For the next 20 minutes, Malcolm spoke candidly. He described the mental gymnastics he'd perfected over the years, the subtle calibrations of tone, the extra certifications placed front and center, the polite restraint in the face of exclusion. He spoke of what he'd once called confrontation math to Margaret Whitfield on the flight, the constant evaluation of whether a particular slight was worth the energy it would take to confront it. Camille was a respectful listener, asking questions that revealed insight without presumption. When their conversation began to wind down naturally, she asked one final question. "Dr. Grant, what would you want people to take away from your experience? Not just the incident, but the way you've responded." Malcolm didn't answer right away. He wasn't interested in giving her a soundbite. "I'd want them to understand the double burden," he said finally. "There's the harm of the incident itself, but also the labor of figuring out how to respond without confirming stereotypes. You weigh every reaction, knowing that being too angry, too firm, too emotional might turn the situation against you, even if you're the one being wronged." He paused, then added, "But I'd also want them to see the hope in it." Mrs. Whitfield didn't have to speak up. My colleagues didn't have to focus on my research instead of the video. These moments reveal more than just bias. They reveal who chooses to stand beside you when it would be easier to stay silent. Camille finished scribbling in her notebook and nodded appreciatively. That's exactly the kind of clarity readers need, not just what happened, but why it matters. She reached into her bag and handed him a business card. "The piece is slated for Sunday. I'll send you an advance copy tomorrow with your quotes. If you'd like to suggest any revisions, just get them to me by Friday." "Thank you," Malcolm said, tucking the card away. "I'd appreciate that." As Camille left, Malcolm checked the time and gathered his things. He had just enough time to make it to Exhibition Hall B for the poster session. The exhibition floor buzzed with energy. Dozens of researchers stood beside their posters, fielding questions and explaining data. Malcolm's team had set up near the center of the hall, a clean, professional display summarizing the biomarker study he'd unveiled in his keynote. His postdoc, Dr. Anita Patel, waved as she spotted him. "Dr. Grant, your keynote was a hit. We've had non-stop questions about the cohort design." "Glad to hear it," Malcolm said with a smile. "Anything tricky I should be ready for?" "Mostly methodology." "A few collaboration requests," Anita said, lowering her voice slightly, "and a couple of questions about the airport video." Malcolm sighed, not surprised. "How did you handle it?" "Redirected to the science," Anita replied crisply. "Dr. Chen briefed us this morning. She was clear. Your research stays at the center." "Smart leadership," Malcolm said. "Let's keep it that way. Who's been the most inquisitive so far?" For the next 90 minutes, Malcolm fielded thoughtful, technical questions from fellow neurologists, researchers, and students. The format allowed for in-depth discussions that built on his keynote. He was in his element. It wasn't until things began winding down that he checked his phone. He smiled at the messages from Celeste. "Stanford campus is gorgeous." Tour guide was fantastic. Jaden pretending to be bored. Classic. Another message made him chuckle. If you ask him, he's 100% set on environmental policy now. "Just to mess with us?" And then one from Margaret Whitfield. "Dinner tonight at Richard's Place in Pacific Heights?" 7 p.m. Nothing fancy. Just stories and good food. Malcolm texted back a confirmation. Then his phone rang. "Hey," he answered, stepping away from the crowd. "How's the Stanford adventure?" "Just wrapped," Celeste said. Her voice was upbeat but tired in that familiar post-mom mode. "It was great. The engineering department is top-notch, but Jaden's pretending to hate it because he thinks we want him to go." Malcolm laughed. "Ah, yes. Classic teenage rebellion. Rejecting what your parents approve of, even if it's amazing." "Exactly," Celeste said. "I told him we'll support whatever path he chooses. But of course now he's talking about studying entomology in rural Oregon. He'll come around. He always does." Malcolm hesitated, then said, "Mrs. Whitfield invited us to dinner at her son's place. I told her maybe, but we can say no if you'd rather rest tonight." "Actually," Celeste said, surprising him, "I'd like to go." "Really?" "Yes. I think it would be good, after everything that's happened. A quiet dinner with someone who saw us fully and didn't look away." That sounds like the perfect end to this whirlwind. Malcolm smiled. He understood exactly what she meant. Okay then. I'll head back to the hotel in time to get changed. See you soon, she said softly. As he ended the call, Malcolm felt a sense of unexpected peace settle in. The past 48 hours had been stormy, emotionally, professionally, and socially. But in that moment, things felt aligned. His work had landed. His family was intact. And through the chaos, they had found allies. Sometimes the story writes you, other times you claim the pen back. Tonight, they'd break bread with someone who reminded them that dignity wasn't just something you carried, it was something others could recognize and affirm. And tomorrow? Tomorrow would come, and they would face it, together. As Malcolm leaned against the window of the cab, watching the Bay Area blur past in golden, late-afternoon light, his phone buzzed again. It was Celeste. "I enjoyed our conversation on the plane," she said as soon as he answered, skipping pleasantries, "and I think a quiet dinner away from hotel food sounds lovely. Plus, Jaden really liked her." "As did I." "Same here," Malcolm agreed. "She's sharp, grounded. I'll confirm with her shortly." "No need to meet us," Celeste added. "We're heading back to freshen up." "Oh, and Malcolm?" Her voice shifted, a little heavier. "The airline called me too." Malcolm sat upright. "Wilson?" "Yes. Same offer as you received. Plus, an additional proposal. They want me to consult on their anti-discrimination policy review." "What did you say?" "I said we'd discuss it. Get back to them tomorrow." Malcolm could hear the shift in her voice as she entered lawyer mode. The cool, deliberate cadence of measured judgment. "The offer is substantive," she said. "It acknowledges the racial nature of what happened. That alone is rare. And if they're serious about the consultation, it could lead to meaningful improvements. If, and that's a big if, they're committed to real change, not just optics. But I'm not convinced yet," Celeste admitted. "This smells like crisis management. If we agree to consult, I'll want written commitments, data transparency, long-term policy shifts, employee accountability, not just workshops and press releases." "That's reasonable," Malcolm said. "Let's talk more tonight. I'm finishing up now, should be back at the hotel in an hour." They said goodbye, and Malcolm returned to the nearly empty poster hall. He thanked his team, Anita and the others, for their tireless work. The mood was upbeat, the research well received, the energy affirming. And yet, a thread of reflection ran quietly underneath. Because behind the success of his presentation lived another truth, a different kind of spotlight, one he hadn't asked for, but could no longer ignore. He stepped outside into the sharp, refreshing breeze of San Francisco and hailed a cab. "The Crestview," he told the driver, sinking into the back seat. As the car rolled through the undulating streets, Malcolm found his thoughts shifting toward the evening ahead. Dinner with Margaret Whitfield and her family. An unexpected but welcome opportunity. She had seen him, seen them. Not just the incident, but the quiet strength they'd carried through it. It wasn't lost on Malcolm that this trip had been a study in duality. Professionally, he'd triumphed. His keynote had landed with clarity and impact. New research partnerships were forming. His team had shined. Personally, though, the confrontation at Portwell International had forced open conversations that were raw, vulnerable, and overdue. Conversations about power, bias, reputation, and how quickly it can all be threatened by someone else's assumption. Still, despite the unease, something else lingered. Something lighter. Hope. Not the naive kind. The kind built from years of watching slow, incremental change and sometimes being the one to spark it. The cab pulled up to the grand entrance of the Crestview Hotel. As Malcolm stepped out, he exhaled deeply. He wasn't entirely at peace, but he was grounded. That was enough, for now. In a modest cul-de-sac home tucked just outside Sacramento, Heather Blake, once known to travelers as a by-the-book gate agent with a perfectly pressed blazer and an artificial smile, sat stiffly on her couch. On the muted television screen, her own face stared back at her. A news anchor narrated with restrained clarity. What began as a local viral video has sparked national debate about racial bias in elite customer service experiences. Sky Atlantic Airlines now confirms there was no computer error. The staff involved has been placed on leave pending review, and the company has announced a full audit of its policies. Heather muted the TV. Her husband, seated beside her in khakis and a faded sports tee, shifted uncomfortably. "They didn't show the full interaction," he said weakly. "This is all being taken out of context." Heather didn't answer, because the truth wasn't about the context. The truth was, there was no defense. Not really. 15 years with the airline. And how many times had she paused just a beat longer when a passenger didn't look like a first-class flyer? How many extra checks? How many fabricated computer errors? Her phone buzzed. Another text from a former coworker, another distant cousin reaching out just to check in. It wasn't support. It was shame masked as concern. She placed the phone face down on the table, unable to face herself, much less anyone else. "What happens now?" her husband asked, not unkindly. Heather stared at the frozen image of her face on the television, caught mid-denial, her expression a mask of forced civility and buried contempt. "I don't know," she whispered, because this wasn't about one interaction. It was about the mirror the video had held up to her, a mirror she hadn't dared to look into before. Now, it was unavoidable. The judgment she'd passed in seconds, the belief that they didn't belong, had been seen by millions. And once seen, it couldn't be unseen. The buzz of her phone resumed. She ignored it, let it ring. She could barely hear over the rising noise in her own mind. Heather remembered the moment clearly, standing at the gate, looking at the Grant family's boarding passes and making the call, silent but swift, that they were out of place. One moment, one bias, one quiet decision. And now, everything unraveling. As the television moved on to lighter news, her own life remained paused in that silent terminal, forever altered. Whether it would become the beginning of real change, or just another footnote in the cycle of public outrage, was a question still waiting for an answer. And for Heather Blake, the real reckoning had only just begun.